Have you ever been told that you and other members of your race weren't important, that you were expendable? Have you ever been told that you were not allowed to speak your own language or practice your own traditions? Native Americans have consistently been discriminated against by the United States government, but in 1973 the heated relations between natives and the FBI blew up in Wounded Knee, South Dakota, in what is known as Wounded Knee 2. 83 years after the first Wounded Knee massacre, government forces once again clashed with natives on the Pine Ridge Reservation in Wounded Knee, South Dakota. This time, natives had AIM, known as the American Indian Movement, as their warriors to stand up against the FBI and unfair treatment from the tribal chairman Richard A. Wilson. Wilson was against AIM's motives and formed the Goons, guardians of the Oglala Nation, as a sort of buffer against any AIM movement, but they were closer to terrorists. AIM's original intentions in taking Wounded Knee was to remove corrupt officials from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, or BIA, but once they arrived, they found that the FBI was already blockading its buildings and other properties. AIM took control of the town so they could maintain everything within it, a sort of control center. With the leverage of the town, AIM made some demands of the FBI to remove the corrupt officials and to make good on the treaties that the American government had signed years earlier with the Sioux tribes. Once the Maine government discovered the AIM takeover of Wounded Knee, they sent officials to surround the town. They not only sent more FBI, but BIA, federal marshals, and local police. Both sides were armed to the teeth, but the government had a better supply of weapons and set up several roadblocks. The standoff became a shoot-off, and for 70 days there were constant gun battles, firefights, and tear gas barrages. This was, in fact, a battle right in the middle of the United States, but for some it was one instance where Indians had at least a little control over their lands. An unnamed Lakota woman who participated in the liberation of Wounded Knee said, "For the first time in many years, the Oglala people could organize themselves according to their ancient spiritual values and ways of life, the Indian way. For 71 days, there was power in the hands of the Indian people. There was support in the streets of many U.S. cities in the form of protests, and the event even got attention from top-scale celebrities." For instance, many remember when Marlon Brando asked a Native woman to speak at the Oscars on his behalf. She stated that because of the poor treatment of Native Americans in the film industry, Brando would not accept the Oscar for his performance in The Godfather. On March 10th, the U.S. government took down their roadblocks, hoping that the Indians would leave, but supporters of AIM rushed into Wounded Knee bringing food and other supplies. On March 26th, phone lines were cut and the mainstream media left. The FBI began to round up and arrest AIM supporters nationwide. Several murders of AIM supporters also occurred at this time, namely that of Frank Clearwater and Buddy Lamont. On May 4th, the White House sent AIM a letter stating that White House representatives would meet with Sioux tribal leaders to discuss the treaties that AIM wanted. AIM then decided to end its occupation. Over 150 people left Wounded Knee, while some stayed. Then the White House, who was currently dealing with the Nixon fiasco that is Watergate, quickly reneged on their promise and said that the days of treaty making with the American Indians ended in 1871, 102 years ago. Following the peaceful conclusion to the 1973 standoff, there were 69 AIM members murdered in the violent aftermath, and other activists were murdered as well. In 1975, there were 2 FBI agents who were killed, and an AIM member, Leonard Peltier, is still in prison serving 2 consecutive life sentences for this crime, even with the questionable so-called evidence against him. Leonard states in his novel, Prison Writings, "I love my people. If you must accuse me of something, accuse me of that, being an Indian. To that crime, and to that crime alone, I plead guilty." The Wounded Knee trials, where many AIM leaders, including Russell Means and Dennis Banks, were put on trial for the siege, began on June 27, 1973. Both Means and Banks had the charges against them dismissed. Another of these men was Pedro Bissonnet. During his trial, Pedro stated, "I will stand with my brothers and sisters. I will tell the truth about them and about why we went to Wounded Knee. I will fight for my people. I will live for them and, if it is necessary to stop the terrible things that happened to Indians on the Pine Ridge Reservation, I am ready to die for them." Pedro was killed 3 months later by police at a roadblock on the Pine Ridge Reservation. This is an important scar on American history that most Americans are not aware of or choose to still ignore. The discriminatory nature of today's media makes it even harder to find information on the government's total disregard for the little, so-called dirty reservation up in South Dakota. AIM made a statement about Wounded Knee in November 1973 that read, "We still have to go to court to ascertain our treaty rights. Once again, we have to rely on the white man and wait for him to give us the right we already have. If he goes against his Constitution and convicts us, we will prove to the world that this is really a police state instead of a free country. The Wounded Knee trials are the most important of the century. They will expose how America practices its founding philosophy." Wounded Knee is not something that Native Americans will forget, but AIM leaders still around today hold memorials and other activities to try and get Native Americans to proudly display their heritage and to never forget the tragedy that happened at Wounded Knee. There is a memorial at Wounded Knee in South Dakota with the names of all those lost engraved in its base. It is there to never let us forget the nightmare that happened twice on the Pine Ridge Reservation and to give us hope for peace.